All right. My name is Nate Moehring, and CLA, and I also help coordinate the advanced Phoenix LabVIEW User Group, Plug Plus, here in the area. So all of our out-of-towners welcome, and if you are in town or nearby, Tucson, whatever, feel free to come see us at any of our plug events. But I'm going to talk to you about creating a project wizard and what that means exactly, and why you want to do it. It's weird. I used to be able to not see here. Okay. So, blank VI disease. It's a term I'm giving to whenever a new developer starts out with a blank VI. What kind of things might happen because of that?
Random user interface.
Okay, good. Good.
Sometimes nothing.
Yeah.
Random architecture. Throw away a lot of time building whatever structure you needed to start with.
Yeah. So less reuse, less commonality. Those are all things I listed. Buggy behavior probably. Definitely decreased efficiency, right? It's going to take longer to start from nothing than starting from a framework. Decreased commonality, we kind of mentioned that, but developer flair is something that I like to, I can tell by looking at a piece of code probably who wrote that, and maybe even what generation of LabVIEW that was written in, So having templates as a starting point is going to be a way to have commonality. Your code is going to be less tested, right? If you have something to start with and it's been well tested, then you have a higher confidence in it. So this is like the equivalent of a biohazard in the software world, right? This is blank VI disease is something that's going to, maybe it's not an immediate effect, maybe you have really high quality developers, they're all CLDs and they're doing good work, but just because of these little differences, on the long run, 10 years from now, they might start to get a little bit of a smell. So the cure, and NI has always been a proponent of institutionalizing templates and standardizing on design patterns. And we all are familiar with some of these design patterns. The state machine, the event producer consumer, and the queue message handler. And of course, there's a lot of OOP type of design patterns. So starting with something that works for your company is a cure, or at least helps prevent the spread of infection of this blank VI disease. So you can, I kind of view it as, creating templates is part of my job as an architect. Like, nobody told me that. My boss doesn't maybe recognize that, but I feel like as an architect, I should be helping the other developers on my team be more efficient, produce higher quality code, and a lot of that starts with the starting point that you put out there. And of course, there's a lot of good starting points out there to pick from, but for various reasons, it seems like every company has their specific needs or their specific case that requires customization of a design pattern and making that your starting point, your template. So these are just some examples of different starting points or templates that I've seen in our organization. Sub-VIs could be as simple as just having the error handler around it. Functional global templates, so you have a quick starting point for creating functional globals. State machines, top-level displays, anything that the user is going to see. TCP/IP servers. So what other kind of templates have you all found that have been useful to create for your developers to start? Do you also create templates in your organization? All right.
Like with the OO side of things, one of the companies doing the hardware abstraction layer, worked with a group at Lockheed so that there was the team that understood test stand, there was the team that understood the design of the hardware abstraction layer, but the younger kids straight out of college didn't need to know any of that, and so they simply had a project template, boom, projects right there, and the engineer knew he had to fill in code in these 2 or 3 spots. So it's really, and maybe that's where you're headed, the automating of the project, or in this case it was OO as an abstraction layer.
Right. Yeah, especially for O because it's not very intuitive, I think, to a newbie.
Right.
What's going on, and what pieces can be filled out, what the relationship is with the dynamic dispatch, and that kind of stuff. So making that easier and apparent about, put code here, kind of a thing. No other templates, right?
I haven't created it yet, but I like the idea for a dialogue template. And you know, my presentation will talk a little bit, but how many times do you have a dialogue with OK, cancel at the bottom that you want to be resizable, and it's either got a title or it doesn't, or it's got, well, we should be able to make a template.
Can you make that modeless too?
What's that?
When you get that done, can you make it modeless as an option on that too?
Sure.
It seems like it's a
I've
real
got
pain
one.
to make a modeless dialogue.
We'll set through just a bunch of random crap on my machine, but I'll pull that one up. It's not a template yet, but
I've created some templates for things like functional globals and state machines, because it just streamlines the way I work and makes sure my user interfaces look the same. So I don't have to sit there and do all that cool stuff I did on that one. I can just replicate it. That makes it faster too.
Yeah, we're creating a template right now for calibration routines that we'll just about to pull the library over, rename the library, and the template conforms to the named library, and it's a great starting point. Already has the report, standardized report built into it. You just need to add whatever specific functionalities there for that particular calibration and so on and so forth. Should be a good starting point to avoid that disease you were talking about.
Yeah, that's a great point that they can actually be very application specific templates too. They don't have to be just general software engineering useful things. You know, they can be, you know, I created a template for RF test equipment, you know, different type of tests we're writing. So,
Let's go back and forth. Another thing that kind of needed to be done one time, and the way I did it is I ended up just putting really good notes in the block diagram, but having some better templates for dynamically running VIs and placing them in subpanels. And I think there's probably room, I don't know what exactly it looks like, but there's probably room for having some basic templates that someone can start with there, because that's always a tricky thing to code initially.
it's all that overhead code, right?
Yeah, so the thought at the time was, okay, with this particular group, if this is something that they're gonna do regularly, then incorporate that into their overall queued message handler template. So, you know, it might be a separate loop or something like that that's controlling any of the dynamic calls, but, so it's not a smaller module, but incorporating it to the main QMH.
Right.
Whoa, lost it, hold on.
It's coming back.
Anytime I'm gonna make a plugin architecture, it's a great idea to have plugin _ template. Or anytime I know I'm gonna rack and stack a bunch of checks on a certain kind of data, just did it yesterday. You create the blank one and you make it nice and big, and you put the controls and indicators at the corners, and you give somebody, and put a put code here in 50-point font right in the middle, and name it _template.py.
Very good. All right, so this is the old way of creating templates that LabVIEW supported. Do file new, it brings up, you know, a dialog. It's got a lot of stuff in it. One little portion of it is from template, which gets pulled in from the LabVIEW folder templates, and then I'm highlighting the design pattern section, and it gives you a nice little preview. Can anybody think of any limitations with this tool and what this capability provides you?
All it does is it gives you the opportunity to create a new VEI from a.vit.
Right.
There's no room to add some additional code to automate the process.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a nice starting point for simple things, but the only thing it's going to instantiate for you is a .vit or from a .vit or a .ctt. So it opens up into a new unsaved VI, and you do file save all, and then it goes through a series of dialogues about what do you want to call this, and where you want to put this, and all this stuff. So the types of templates you can create with this are kind of limited. But there's more than, as Nancy was saying, to templates, there can be a lot more than just VITs and CTTs. So what kind of other things would we put in a template?
Unit tests.
Oh, wow, jump straight.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm cheating.
Well, documentation, how am I going to use this template?
Good.
Config files.
Certain built-in functions that you're gonna repeat over and over again.
So some sub-VIs that are,
A watchdog in an embedded job or something like that.
Yeah.
Something you'll always put in there.
Sometimes
speaking of embedded, you probably need a project just to target that embedded thing, right?
Oh, sure.
Sometimes you don't want just a template, maybe you want to use a
Right, so your template might include classes, right?
An entire project is populated with what you normally use.
Good, these are all good. So one part, I think the foundation is the LabVIEW project. And some of the uses for the LabVIEW project, which you're all familiar with, it helps you organize your code. And I'm using the word module here as kind of the concept of I'm starting with a generic template that would be used in the creation of a module as part of a larger application, but that's not necessarily the case. But it's allowing you to logically organize that module or that piece of code. Templates can also include build specs or customizing advanced features of build specs. Like, I think very few people are aware of the zip file build spec and how convenient that can be. Just say, zip everything in this project up to a zip file and make a backup copy of it. I'm not saying replace that source code control, but it's sometimes nice to have snapshots you can put away somewhere and come back to it if you want to, without having to do a commit into your source code control. Also, like installer settings. Maybe you don't need to install everything in the runtime engine. You start down selecting. A number of developer isn't going to know what they can probably down select, but you probably know because you know more about the LabVIEW tool suite and what all the installers do. But when you start, of course, when you start customizing these things, you also probably want to document somewhere in your template or in a README file or whatever that when you instantiate this, take these things into consideration. These things have been set. You might want to change those. Whatever. Of course, projects also help identify cross-linking. That was one of the main reasons for the project coming to being, as I understand it, was it gives you that dialogue of, hey, did you mean for this to load from here? Because I thought it was going to load from there. The Files tab being a great way to relocate code. Everybody knows about the Files tab and uses that regularly, right? Well, I hope you're not relocating code that much, but when you do need to, that's the best place to do it. Of course, the project is the way you get access to the unit test framework. And then you have your different deployments, targets, and of course using a project gives you the ability to have different application instances open at the same time. The next fundamental piece of a template, I would say, is probably your library. The library is really what defines a module. The libraries give you namespaces, so you don't have to worry about prefixing BIs, and that's huge. I think it was what Robert was saying about you can do a save as on a library, and the whole library is duplicated. You don't have to do file save as on each BI to make sure it's got a unique name, because now the library has a unique name. So that's huge. Of course, the library itself serves to increase cohesion, because everything in that library should all be closely related to solve one function, perform one function. And it also decreases coupling because you can set the access scope in those BIs. So, less brittle code, yeah. So if you have an application where you may have a lot of BIs in your application, you don't know who's calling who necessarily, and you make a change to one BI, and you think you understand what the impacts are, but in reality this is some other caller that you're not aware of, then that coupling is increasing your risk because you might break that caller. You're all aware of this. But when you set those sub-BIs of that library to private, now you're forcing them to make their own copy of that if they really want it, and therefore you're not taking the risk upon yourself, so that you don't have to worry about the impacts of code changes. And of course, libraries give you icon overlays, which is just a real convenient way to make all your related BIs look similar. And we get a lot of the same things with classes. I think classes are also foundational to creating templates of any size or complexity. For one thing, because it reduces the entry barrier to classes for the newer developers. If you create a template that already has some class framework already established for them, and all they have to know to do is to right-click on the class and say Add New Method, then they don't have to understand necessarily all the intricacies of how to create the class and set up the inheritance and all that kind of stuff. That part's already done for them. And wire patterns. And then you're automatically then encouraging inheritance and encapsulation just because you're starting to build your functionality into the class instead of just for all sub-BIs. Again, you have icon overlays, custom wire patterns, and automatic data mutation. We've been burned by that a couple times, but not in a severe way, so I'm careful about that. But anyway, so I just recently, I used to be big on these kind of templates, the VITs, but it wasn't really until the last few years that I've been starting to incorporate more of these kind of things into my templates and being really frustrated that, okay, I got this great template, but it takes a whole lot of work to make an instance of it. Ryan can account to that.
The text file of instructions was like 50 items long. Here's how
Yeah.
to make a new instance.
Yeah, so I wrote this really detailed instruction set for the user to follow, and it's error prone because the operator, is never going to fully understand exactly what I'm describing. If I wrote that many words, it would never read them, and so it was never followed exactly correctly the way I intended it, and it was literally 29 steps. I went back and counted it.
I exaggerate.
Not by much. And so the solution that they introduced in LabVIEW 2012 is the Create Project Wizard. File, create project. You've all probably used that dialog, right? Does everybody know what dialog I'm talking about? Has anybody looked into utilizing that to create your own project wizards to have it come up in that menu also? All right.
Nope.
That's kind of what I was expecting, so good. I'm just saying because I don't think as a community very many people have looked at it. I mean, the larger.
That's what I love about it, is then you can literally, for your group, completely customize that getting started experience and have just the stuff that your group is always using over and over.
Right.
It's fantastic.
And it enables us to do a lot of things that we couldn't do before. So that project wizard by itself, LabVIEW ships with some great project starting points. I recommend looking at them, if nothing else, just to kind of learn kind of the NI recommended way of doing things. But then also you can plug in your own projects so they show up in your developer spaces. So I think there's a perfect cure for our blink VI disease. All right, then I'm just going to show real fast what it kind of looks like when it's finished. The one that I did most recently. Alright, so I have a new subcategory of templates for our company, but they also show up in the all category. I set their priority so they set up at the top of the list. A simple name and then a description of what that template is. And optionally, you can have a link to more documentation. But when you double click on one of these, this is the default wizard dialog that comes up. You just specify where you want to put your project and what you want to call it. You can optionally set an icon overlay. And by default, it doesn't do anything else. I just click finish. And it's copying my project to that target location. You know what? I was tinkering in making screenshots. I was tinkering with my scripting, so I probably broke my scripting. Bummer. Let me see if the other one's broken. The other one's not quite as exciting. It doesn't do quite as much. Should have done a revert on my source code control. I can still do a revert on my source code control. I'll do that in a second if this doesn't work.
Do you have any screenshots? Show screenshots.
Oh no. Alright, one more chance.
So while he's doing that,
Thank you.
NI has put together a couple of these templates for like OOP. So if you're new to OOP and you want to go through, there's a tutorial that Eli Carey has put together. That is basically it's what Nate is doing here, and that teaches you what OOP is. There's another one for the software management tools. So some of the tutorials on the NI webpage, it'll take you to links where you can download these templates that will then step you through all of these different exercises. So there are a lot of good use cases for it.
Well, that's funny. My source code control says that it's not updated or not modified, so I'm not sure why it's not working, but it's minor to the presentation, so we'll just keep moving. All right, so we just saw this dialog. The way you get something into this list is you have to drop an XML file in one of two places within the disk structure. One of those is in LabVIEW project templates metadata, and it creates a new category for each XML file it finds there. The other place is in like your user app data, something or another. If you just want templates for yourself, I guess. And so this kind of poses a problem for me. I'd kind of like to hear what your take is on, if I have all my code in source code control, and it typically does not go into program files, it goes to my development directory. Well, what would be the best way to manage getting this file in the correct location for developers who are just doing a checkout on their repository and stuff? Anybody have any ideas on that? I'm asking for your help here.
We have an application at Medtronic that we made for just restoring an entire manifest of build components and just taking it from some release server and putting it on your system wherever you say to put it. So we could use something like that if you did, or you can create something like that. But the only downside to that is we're using that for production, for releasing all the released artifacts to production testers. So, do we want to include this kind of stuff in a production tester? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, something like that, you almost have to have a utility. I don't know if there's an easy way.
Is there a way to do an installation package for your template, and that would, direct to the right location?
Well, I think the only real answer here that I know of is package manager.
Oh, okay.
To kind of
Or something like it.
get
right?
your developers started in a new, and this is one of the things that it puts there. But anyway, in my templates folder, I still have a README file, and the step one says put this file in this location. It's got the full path in there, so all you have to do is copy and paste and drop it in.
When I was at Intel, we wrote a DOS script that, first of all, we looked up an HTML file that never changed. And that's where it pointed to mapping, where LabVIEW would dynamically map a share or a folder using a lab account on the IT network. And then you could always point everything to the same spot and grab the same thing.
When does that run?
When you launch your program, we have to launch an application or a VI.
Right.
It would just go out and check this one web page, grab the path, map that path using the administrative passwords, and then load it.
Yeah, I mean, we could do this easily with our application too, but the problem is we kind of want this before you start an application, right? As a developer tool. But anyway.
Well, Nate, I have one question. Is
Okay.
anybody in here SVN or Subversion Ninja? Raise your hands. White belt. back off from that. Is there a hook that you can tie to whenever you check something out or update, that you can go do something afterwards? Because I've heard rumors. I haven't done
You
that.
can
I would imagine yes.
I know we use Mercurial, but I'm sure Subversion can probably do. You can script a lot of the functions that you can do in those utilities with something, right? And so then that something, I don't know, you can do with a lot of different kinds of scripting.
Yeah.
Because we've opened up the ability and all the information you need to integrate things into the project itself. So it might be worth contacting, I think his name is Eric Metzler at Point, because they're the ones that do the Tortoise SVN toolkit, and so they're integrating the update, the commit, and so all of that is now pulled down in the project. So there's probably no reason why there's not something in there somewhere where you could add another piece of code, and Eric might be able to help you with that.
Okay.
And if you don't get any traction with Eric, let me know, because we can always put you, I would go up to the tools network and maybe play around, because David said may have some ideas too.
I know her.
I know that what scripts in your repository will run when you do updates.
That's a good idea, a hook script.
Yeah, so that anytime you update from that repository, it does other things as well. I haven't played with that yet, but I know that that's available.
All right, so inside this metadata file, there's a few things you need to define. One of them is just the title that you want to show, the description. The filters, I think, define, or the keywords define when they type in the little search bar. There's a search bar in this dialog. What keywords would cause this project to show up. Most important thing is the location of where of the folder containing your template project. And because everything is, they think that all the templates are going to be within that folder here. It's actually one level up. There's a source folder at the same level as metadata. they expect that location path is going to be relative to the project path or something. And so I have all this nasty relative path direction to get to the development folder where our template would normally be located after you do a checkout or developer path. But after that, everything else is relative to this location path. So the project path and the name is just, you know, in location path. You can also assign an image. I actually stole an image from a different project. The documentation path, because my scriptable Qt message handler is very similar to the normal Qt message handler, I'm just stealing the Qt message handler's documentation, so I'm actually referring back to the National Instruments source for Qt message handler. It's better than nothing, right? And then there's some features about enabling the scripting code that we're going to talk a lot more about. And the priority determines where it shows up in the full list. So again, you saw the second page come up with where you want to put things. So you specify the destination folder, the project name, and pretty much all the wizard does for you out of the box is copy that to the destination and change the project name. That's pretty much all it does. The icon template feature is not all that useful because it only works on bare VIs in your project. So if you have any libraries or classes, it's not going to touch those or any of the VIs in those. But it does allow you to define custom pages and actions, and that's what we're going to focus on. So in that metadata file, there's two key lines here for enabling the custom scripting. So custom VI mode, when you specify after page 2, means that you're going to be running this VI after it's already done the copying to the destination location. And that VI has to follow a connector pane pattern that is defined in the documentation. They have a path to a sample, and it gives you a reference to the project that just got created in that destination location, and it gives you an object as well, which is not well documented. We'll talk about that in a second. But there's some other options you can put in these things as well. You can say that no dialogue should ever come up, and then there's also an after page 1. I just described after page 2 with the user interface, which I can't find any examples in the shipping LabVIEW of any project using that feature, and it's not very well described. So I think that means put a user interface like a subpanel, put your VI into a subpanel in the wizard. I think that's what that means, but it's not very well described. But this documentation here comes out of the LabVIEW help. Kind of twisted my brain for a while because I had a hard time thinking about what page 1 and page 2 was. Because they refer to page 1 as the first screen that comes up. That has all the options before you've made any selection. And then the second screen is really what I think of the first step of the process. This is where you've made your selection, you're starting to do something. So it kind of twisted my brain some. But, and also interestingly enough, I think I described it here. I'll come back to that. Also interesting enough, you can actually create a template that does not have a LabVIEW project defined. And that might be useful if you wanted to create the entire project from scratch on the fly every time. I'm not really sure why that would be good, but they do use that option for the create blank project and the create blank VI. They use VI scripting to create a blank one instead of using something on disk as the blank one. And so this after page 1 would mean as soon as they select this, don't give me this dialogue, and start running whatever the VI is directly. So that would be a good way if you just wanted to skip that second page altogether and create your own little wizard path, you could do it that way. But then there's also, if you start digging down in the code, the object that they provide on this connector can be overloaded. You can create your own child classes and overload methods and stuff. And the actor framework template does some of that, but it's not documented. And most of the VIs behind all this are all password protected, so it's very difficult to even begin to guess how to use that feature. So I'm not doing that, but in the notes section of this presentation, I give some paths to the VIs that give the best illustrations of how you might do that if you want to do more customization. I think by overloading these methods, you can override more of the behavior of the wizard, and as opposed to just calling your scripting VI and just doing what you ask it to do, you can actually change some of the behavior during the process by overriding the certain methods that the wizard is calling. Does that make sense? So it gives you more hooks at different places in the wizard, but
So Nate, did you download Eli's measurement utility?
yeah.
I started toying around with that and looking at some of the stuff he was doing under the hood, but did you find any of your answers there at all, or?
He may be using that, I can't remember.
Yeah, because there's.
Maybe it was him and not Steven, I don't remember.
Yeah, so for the purpose of really kind of digging into the Project Wizard, I found that definitely a little bit helpful.
Yeah, he did do a lot with that.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the idea that your template has a lot more than just a couple of VIs, here's the directory structure on disk of what my template looks like. You know, if I don't only have a project, but inside the project, pretty much everything is within a library, and one of the items within the library is a class, which I put in subfolders. And so whenever the wizard makes a copy of it into the destination location, that's kind of meaningless to me, because I want to also get rid of this keyword, scriptable QMH, everywhere else that it exists. You know, so that's where you have to start writing your scripting code to start programmatically making things named what you want to name. Want them to be named. And there wasn't much out there that I found to help me understand how to do that. So it was a little bit trial and error. I spent a lot of time creating a simple wizard, which just crashed. But I have run it many times, and it works fine, I promise.
Hey Nate, I may have a copy, so we can try and run it over lunch while everybody's digesting.
During your presentation. Or during lunch. Yeah, I'll figure it out. Good idea. So I'm going to show you snippets of code that I had to come up with in my scripting to facilitate this, and maybe someday this will be useful to you, and we won't spend a lot of time on it. So in order to relocate the class, so remember the class has its own little folder name that we always want to get rid of that folder name and the class name itself. And also remember that all of these VIs, the method VIs, they have stored within them the class name, what class I belong to. So all those VIs have to be updated as well. So there's a process here. So I use the reference to the project that is given to me by the wizard in the connector pane. And I take in the paths of the destination folder and project name, and these are just constructed items of what I want to call it. You know, so instead of being scriptable QMage_class, now it's users project_class, that kind of stuff. And so I say open up the class, so I get a reference to the class. There's a method here that says give me all the methods, and all of my methods currently are public, but it only allows you to query for one type at a time. So potentially you'd have multiple methods saying give me all the private, give me all the protected, give me all the community. And so that gives me an array of paths to the method VIs. And each method VI I open up, and I'm gonna save that method VI to the new target folder, my project_class, instead of scriptable QMH_class. So now it's in the new location, and so we do that for all the method VIs, and then I'm going to save the actual class to the new location, and then once all the references are closed, then I can delete the temporary scriptable QMH_class folder. So that's how I relocate the class members to the destination. I have to do similar things for the library, but the library is a lot easier. So I just, again, use the application reference to ask for the library reference at the, so remember the dialog, the wizard did not rename my library, just the project file. So this is actually a different screenshot because it's more simplified, but anyway, same type of thing. So I just do a save as on the library to get it to the correct path, file name, and then delete the original library file.
Real quick. Is all this done after a copy is made of your original project?
Yeah, this is in the destination location.
So you're renaming stuff in new file?
In the destination, yeah. Thanks for making that clear.
Could you go back to, if you don't mind, yeah, right there. So this is where you're dealing with the classes. So in this case, you just have one class?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not dealing, because one of the challenges I had, and this is kind of a curious question here, is in a scenario where there is a hardware abstraction layer, an abstraction layer of any kind, or any inheritance, and then really thinking through carefully, okay, if my template is gonna allow a newbie to edit or create a new child class, where really should that parent class reside? You know, is that parent class gonna then actually reside, you know, because there's many places it could reside, or is there, do we actually accidentally end up in, with a second copy of it? So there's a lot of little design challenges there around that I hadn't fully thought through yet.
That's a good question. I think the answer is probably the parent class is part of your framework that you want them to use, so it probably
Yeah.
should not reside in the template folder.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I'm looking for the best so I think I skipped over something I wanted to mention. Sorry. I don't remember where it says it at, but that's a good, it brings up a good point to my mind, which you didn't mean to bring to my mind, which was make sure that everything that you want to duplicate to the destination location is part of your project, your LabVIEW project file, and make sure that anything that you don't want duplicated that happens to be in the same folder in the source location is not in your project file. So what I mean by that is like your VI scripting VIs that make all this automation happen, you don't want to put that in the LabVIEW project because then it'll get copied to the destination along with everything else. And likewise, your project doesn't want to be pointing to, it doesn't want to include any of its dependencies in it that you don't intentionally want to duplicate. And not only would that duplicate things you didn't mean it to, but it would also mess up the directory structure in the destination folder because everything is relative based, relative path. You'd end up with a deep nested directory structure so that they all have a common parent folder, and then your VIs would not be able to find anything. Be like, where was this dependency that you told me was over here? I'm 6 levels too deep and I can't find anything. So you do have to put some thought into what you include in the project file itself because that's what gets used as the basis for what gets copied. All right, so some other things that you might want to do with your automation in the project wizard. Open up supporting instruction files. It doesn't do this yet, but I want to actually have it open up the README file. Like I said, there still is a README file for some things, and I'll describe that in a second. And so just having it bring that right to the user's attention would be good. Or any other, if there are specific VIs where they're supposed to go put code here, you know, you have a comment that says put code here, bring that VI right away and say, hey, you gotta take care of this and don't forget, you know. One thing that bugs me is that the runtime menu path is always absolute path. It's not relative like the rest of LabVIEW. So if your template has a top level VI that has a default runtime menu assigned, after the project just got copied, it's still pointing to the RTM file in the template folder, not the destination folder. So having it switch, you know, point to the new the RTM file is good. LabVIEW test files for LabVIEW Unit Test Framework are terribly handled. They're not handled at all right now in 2012, and there's a CAR against that. It did not get fixed in 2013. But I'll go into more of that in a second. There were 2 other bugs that I came across that I didn't even bother reporting because I was so frustrated at the time. But they were minor. The wizard, or when the scripting occurs, there were some controls that, or at least there was one control that had its label changed. For no explainable reason to me, the scripting or the wizard changed its label in the process. And there were other controls that had their labels visibility turned off. So they became invisible label or non-visible labels. I don't know why, but your scripting can fix that. So, test run many times the project, the wizard, to make sure that everything comes out the way you want it to be. And then also I mentioned you can put in customized build specs and, oh, actually what I meant here was automating the process of customizing your build specs. So even though you've now got a project in the destination location, the fields within those build specs that you created by default, they still have the old project names in them. Or the old VI names or whatever, like your top level VI. And it is possible to automate the modification of build specs, but it is extremely hard. I've done it before and I would not recommend it to anybody if at all possible. So one of the main things in my README file that comes up is there's a huge section about customizing the build specs. Go to this tab or this little page of the build spec, go to this field, change the name here, and maybe someday the API for modifying build specs will be better, but it's probably a pretty low priority on the list, I would guess. And cleaning up temporary files and folders, and just anything that you don't want to be copied, make sure you don't put it in the project file.
Do you show the README file to the user as part of this?
Not yet, but I was saying that I would like to do that. There's no reason.
So you'll
to
pop a VI with some checkboxes. Have you?
Ah, there you go.
done this? Done that?
Quality control. You do that. All right, so a little bit about unit test framework and getting that to work in the project, because I did spend a lot of time on it, and I think it would be nice to help the younger developers, or even myself, who has not been diligent about creating unit tests. You know, we've had that as a tool available to us for a long time, but you know, it doesn't get used that much. If you have the wizard create a default set of tests on the VIs that already exist within your project, your template project, then there's a lot more incentive or encouragement or less barrier of entry to actually start updating those tests or create new tests as they develop their project, right? So I thought this was kind of important, at least for me, to start trying to encourage that. So what I found you had to do because of this bug in LabVIEW 2012 and 13 is you actually have to omit the LV test files from the project. Don't include them. If you do include them, whenever the destination gets created, the destination, I think, the source actually gets modified. It actually modifies the source LV test files to point to the destination folder. And that's all wrong. Now you've messed up your source folder. So don't include them in the project, but then you have to manually, or at least part of your automation, copy those LV test files to the destination folder and programmatically update some fields within that LV test file, but that's not as easy as it sounds because they're actually UTF-16 format, not UTF-8, which LabVIEW uses by default. So you have to do some binary wizardry, and you also have to use some Windows DLL calls to modify those VIs. And then, or not VIs, LV test files.
Can you post
And
this
then,
code? Can you post this code?
I have a screenshot of it. Yeah. And then you have to go in and add those LV test files to your LV libs or LabVIEW projects, wherever you want to put them, so that they show up when they open up the project. And then finally save the library, save the project. And as a side note, I found out that you can't create an LV test on a class method VI where the class is marked private within a library. So no, I couldn't create any LabVIEW test files on a private class, but I don't know if that's that big of a deal. I didn't submit that as a car. All right, so this is just quickly, so I'm looking at the source folder, looking for all the LV test files, and then I kind of calculate what the destination location should be, and then open up, I copy it to the destination, and I open it, read it, strip out the Unicode upper byte stuff. I do a string replacement on the old LV test file name, or actually the VI under test file name, and the new VI under test, and then convert it back to Unicode, and then write it out of the binary file. So I won't go into that any further. That was kind of painful. And then you have to add that test to the library. So again, I have a library reference, and I'm going to go through I'm basically going through the tree of the project to figure out which project leaf in that tree is named private, so I get a reference to that leaf. And any of my LV test files that live in a sub-VI folder, I want to put into the private, because in my projects I like to have a private folder where everything underneath the folder is marked private, so it's very clear and I don't see them regularly. I should say the user doesn't see them regularly. And then add this file, that LV test file, in that location within the project. Does that make sense? But if it's not in a sub-VI folder, so there's actually a sub-VI folder in my template, then it can just go and directly in the library at the top level. So this is a very simplistic example of what you would need to do. Obviously your template structure might be more complicated, but just adding that LV test file in the correct location according to wherever that VI lives is what I was trying to get here, and then save the library. All right, getting close. And then one thing I found very useful was to create a disabled enable case at the beginning, so I can open a reference to a static project that was created by the first step of the wizard, but I want to use that as my starting point for debugging my automation, so I can just run my VI directly after that first step is done as many times as I need.
question about that. Do you have to revert back to the first copy before you run that? Or do you?
Yeah, that's why I did mention making a backup copy.
Right.
So I always have to paste it or change this path over
Right.
and read it or whatever, but yeah. All right, nothing with that. All right, so I talked a lot about scripting. I kind of use scripting, although I didn't really use real scripting. And I'm hitting the close to my time. Can we have five more minutes or so?
Yeah.
All right.
Everybody's cool.
I wanted to give a presentation on VI scripting for a long time. I was surprised I could not find very much online. I searched for hours for preparation for this presentation. I could not find any good tutorial VI scripting, and so I put my own in just a few slides, and I think it's very action or high powered. So just as a high level, well actually first, who here has used VI scripting before? Okay, not very many. Who here knows what VI scripting is and when you want to use it? Wow. All right. So VI scripting is basically an extension of VI Server. It's all reference-based, but it allows you to inspect, modify, or create VIs and controls on the fly programmatically. It only works in development environment, so don't write any scripting code and then try to make it into an exe. It won't work, because when you modify code, you have to have a compiler to compile that code, and the runtime engine doesn't have a compiler. And so those of you who raise your hand, can you briefly share what you've done with scripting, like your use case for it? Not briefly?
No.
Or you can't share?
You've already seen it.
Oh, okay.
Actually, a question what script makes nicely, but usually the recurrent feature for release is to dynamically create controls.
Right. Yeah, actually,
So what you suggest to do it?
we actually have a tool
After
that does
compiling.
that. We take an XSD file, the schema definition, and we auto-generate a CTL file from that XSD file. So that was a great application for scripting.
What is CTL file?
The control file.
Control file.
Yeah. So that was one good use. So we've had a number of them, but I'm short of time.
Yeah, but you need to put it as a diagram.
Well, the first step is just to create the CTL file so that I can use it easily within the code. So yeah, then you put it on the diagram.
Actually, no, you have CTL files, right? But you want to put and
Yeah.
remove it from the diagram.
Yeah, you can do scripting. Yeah, once you.
Scripting, no problem yet, after compilation.
After compilation.
Yeah.
So you mean like in runtime
No,
engine?
it's no, you want to have from 1 to 10 similar times controls.
Right. So yeah, just anytime you have a repetitive action, we need to drop them all into control.
It's very easy with scripting, right? Because you can
Yeah.
use it
Good,
in
good.
runtime. So you don't have suggestions.
I'd like to talk about, if anybody has scripting applications, that's fun to talk about, but I'm out of time, so I need to keep moving. At a high level, a VI is made up of diagrams. They're actually nested diagrams. Diagrams contain nodes. A node can be a structure, and a structure can have one or more diagrams in it. And then nodes also have terminals. In case of a structure, your terminals are like your input and output tunnels. In case of like a control indicator, it's going to be the terminal that you wire to in the diagram, that kind of stuff. But so it's a hierarchy kind of a thing. So this is just illustrating what I just said here. These blue items all come from the scripting palette on the application control. Create a new VI, get it a reference to its diagram, get a reference to all the nodes on that diagram, so it's an array, and then every node has an array of terminals if you want to access the terminals in that diagram. So when you flip to the block diagram, Control E, you're actually seeing a stack of diagrams. We refer to them as the block diagram, but really only the outer, wider, most, the white portion is called the root diagram, or the, what do they call it? Top level diagram. Within structures, you have sub-diagrams. And in fact, within sub-VI, you have sub-diagrams, all that kind of stuff. So in this case, there could be any number of, well, actually there's 3 diagrams in this, because one for true, one for false, and then one for the container. But what I like about this slide, it comes out of LabVIEW help file, is that it shows you that with VI Server, you break everything down to references at a very fine level. So there's a reference to this terminal, to that outer terminal, to this inner terminal, to the tunnel if you wanted it, to that. Everything has a reference. And so your diagrams, your VI scripting code can end up looking like spaghetti because you're maintaining a lot of references usually, unless you're doing that with clusters or something. But you get the idea. Again, in the for loop, you have references to a lot of stuff if you want that level of access. These tables down here describe the object hierarchy. So everything is a G object. Some G objects are nodes, some nodes are structures, some structures are for loops, or loops, could be a while loop, and then some loops are for loops. So that's kind of how it breaks down in the hierarchy. And if you use a invoke node or a property node at any of these levels, for any of these types of things, you get different sets of properties and methods you can do on that object. There's been a flurry of emails lately on the VI scripting forum on NI's site about how to enable it. It used to be prior to LabVIEW 2012, I believe, you did have to download some separate stuff to enable VI scripting, but 2012 and beyond, it's now a default option. Well, actually it's not default, but it's part of LabVIEW shipping, and you just have to enable these checkboxes in the LabVIEW options to see them within your palette, maybe, and definitely to see them within the property node tree that you drop down on. Otherwise, because it does add a lot of them, otherwise it'll be the original condensed list, and it's easier browsing. Also, by enabling this, you see a lot of stuff in the context help, which is kind of like accelerator information to help you script it faster. So it's kind of helpful. I don't think I have time for a demo. I'll run one of their demos just to show you, but I wasn't actually write a VI. So this comes out of the LabVIEW help folder, and it's just a VI that creates a very simple VI. So new VI, we're going to open up its front panel and its block diagram, and we're going to do some positioning. On that VI, we're going to create a new object. It's going to be an array container. So this specifies the G object type. So here's the tree of all the different types, and this is a control, and it's an array. And this specifies the style, so the modern. And then I get a new reference here. It's a reference to the object I just created. Now I'm going to create a new control of a numeric inside of that array. And once I've done that, I don't need that reference anymore. And then I'm going to get a reference to the terminal of that array control so that I can wire it up to something later. Depending on the input, I'm going to drop one sub-VI or another. And sub-VIs are nodes. I'm going to drop an indicator on that diagram. So if I go back to here, it goes back to, oh, it's on the VI. All right, sorry. New object, indicator, and then I'm going to get its terminal as well. From the VI that we dropped, we get its terminals. It has more than one terminal. And so we're looking for the input terminal and the output terminal. And then we're going to wire the input terminal to the array control, and we're going to wire the output terminal to the indicator. And so these are methods that operate on the terminal. Or conversely, this same connect wire method also exists on the node class. So I could wire a node here, connect wires, and this is nifty because now I can connect multiple items. This wiring specs, you can specify a list of input and outputs, and so you can wire much faster than having to do one at a time. But anyhow, so when I run this, it opened a new VI and dropped the sub-VI, and dropped the control, and dropped the indicator, and wired it together. So that's how scripting works. It's not super fast. I mean, one VI came up okay, but if you have a series of things happening, you can kind of watch it, which is kind of fun, but it's also kind of concerning, that you don't want to rely on the speed of scripting. So, but anyway, I'm almost done. Thank you for your patience. Oh, yes. All right, the dump. I've done quite a bit of scripting in the past. At the time, I did not know about the traverse reference because it didn't used to be public. So what you had to do in the past was you had to say, give me all the nodes, and then for each node, what kind of node is it? And if it's a structure, give me all your diagrams, and then you loop again. on this diagram, give me all your nodes, if it's a structure, and you have to parse it that way. The problem with doing that, for one, it's slow. For two, over time, they add new structures, right? We've had some new structures added in recent history. And so my sub-VIs that I wrote a long time ago didn't know about those new type of structures, and then they would choke. So now there's a better way to do that. So now you can use either the OpenVI reference, or open object reference, or traverse for objects. The open object reference is nice because you can say, give me a specific object of a certain name, but only if that object exists within this particular reference. So that particular diagram or a particular control. So it can be some kind of container. If it's a nested thing, it's not going to work. But this is nice. The traverse for GObjects is nice because you can say, give me all controls of a certain class, like all strings, regardless of what level of nesting it is in the controlled CTL on the front panel or within the diagrams in the block diagram, where you can say, give me all string labels or all whatever, you know, comments, that kind of stuff. So that's very handy. Wish I'd known about that a long time ago. When you want to replace code with something that's there, there's a replace method. And the nice thing about that is it auto wires back to the source. So you don't have to manually wire things as long as the connector panes are similar. So that's a lot faster. You can also set up your scripting to create transactions on the BI that is automating. So you can say start a transaction, do your scripting, and then if it's completed successfully, end the transaction. And what that does is in the file or in the edit undo option, the user can then say, I want to undo that action because of what I really wanted to do. Or if something failed, then it rolls it all the way back to where it was. You know, you can automatically roll back as if the scripting never happened. That's nice. With the new VI, you can specify a template path, which means use this VI and disk as a starting point for the new VI I'm going to create. And so by combining multiple templates like that, you can really accelerate